The story of the gaming processor does not begin with gigabytes or high-definition graphics, but with a humble frequency that today would seem like a standstill. In the mid-1970s, the world of computing was a playground for the elite, until a chip called the MHz 6502 arrived. It ran at a mere 1 MHz, a speed so slow by modern standards that a digital clock today has more processing power. Yet, this tiny piece of silicon was the spark that ignited the home console revolution, powering the legendary Nintendo Entertainment System and the Apple II. It proved that genius does not require infinite resources, but rather the ability to create entire universes within the most brutal of constraints. During this era, developers were not just programmers. They were digital magicians who had to trick the hardware into doing the impossible. When you played Super Mario Bros. In 1985, you were witnessing a miracle of optimization where every single byte of data was precious. There was no room for waste, no space for extra lines of code, and every pixel on the screen was a hard-won victory against the limitations of the chip. This was a time when the human spirit outperformed the hardware, teaching us that limitations are often the greatest catalysts for true creativity. If those early pioneers had possessed the power we have today, the iconic simplicity that defined gaming might never have been born. As we transitioned into the late 1980s, a new era of pride began to emerge, often referred to as the first real console war. This was not just a battle of brands, but a clash of philosophies between two giants, Sega and Nintendo. Sega marketed their Genesis console with the famous term blast processing, making children believe their hardware possessed a mystical speed. In reality, it was the Motorola 68000 processor that provided the edge, running at 7.67 MHz. This era taught us that marketing could be just as powerful as the silicon itself, creating a sense of identity and allegiance that divided schoolyards. While the consoles fought for dominance in the living room, the personal computer was quietly evolving into a powerhouse that would eventually overshadow them all. The introduction of the Intel 8386 and the 8486 changed the conversation from toys to professional-grade engines. These chips allowed for a level of mathematical precision that consoles could not yet match, setting the stage for a revolution in three-dimensional space. We began to see that hardware was not just a container for games, but a platform that dictated the very boundaries of what a human mind could visualize. The playground politics of the 16-bit era were merely a prelude to a much larger, more global struggle for technological supremacy. By the early 1990s, the crown of gaming performance had clearly shifted toward the personal computer. This was the era of the Intel Pentium, a name that would become synonymous with the raw potential of the digital age. When Doom was released in 1993, it was not just a game, it was a cultural earthquake that shattered our understanding of immersion. It required the fast, integer-heavy processing of Intel's new architecture to render its terrifying corridors in real time. This moment proved that the future of gaming would be dictated by the architecture of the chip, not the branding on the plastic box. As the decade progressed, we witnessed the birth of the megahertz arms race, where speed became the ultimate social currency among enthusiasts. In the year 1999, the competition between Intel and AMD reached a boiling point as both companies raced toward the 1 GHz milestone. Every few months, a new processor would claim the throne, and consumers followed these benchmarks like they were religious scriptures. This was a period of frantic, breathless progress where the numbers on the box were the only thing that seemed to matter. However, this obsession with raw clock speed was leading the industry toward a dangerous cliff that few saw coming. The turn of the millennium brought us the 1 GHz barrier, a feat that felt like science fiction finally becoming a tangible reality. In March of the year 2000, AMD famously beat Intel to this psychological finish line with the Athlon processor. It was a moment of profound humiliation for the giant from Santa Clara, proving that size and history were no protection against a faster, hungrier rival. The industry was high on the adrenaline of speed, believing that frequencies would simply continue to climb forever. We were living in a dream of infinite growth, unaware that the laws of physics were about to demand a very heavy toll. Intel's response to the Ryzen competition was the Pentium 4, a processor designed with a singular, narrow-minded goal: extreme clock speed. The architecture, known as NetBurst, was built to reach frequencies of 10 GHz or more in the distant future. But as the clock speeds rose toward the middle of the decade, a fundamental problem emerged that no amount of marketing could hide. The chips were becoming incredibly hot, consuming massive amounts of power while delivering diminishing returns in actual performance. This was the era of architectural hubris, where a company's ego blinded it to the reality of its own failing technology. By the year 2004, the Pentium 4 had become a symbol of stagnation and inefficiency, often referred to as a space heater rather than a processor. While Intel struggled with heat and power, AMD seized the opportunity to innovate with the Athlon 64. This chip was not just faster, it was smarter, introducing the world to 64-bit computing and integrated memory controllers. It was a masterclass in elegant design, proving that how a chip works is far more important than how fast it ticks. For the first time, the loyal Intel fanbase began to crumble, as gamers and professionals alike migrated toward the superior performance of the underdog. The industry reached a breaking point where the old way of thinking simply cranking up the speed was no longer sustainable. Intel was forced into a moment of deep humility, abandoning the failed net-burst architecture and looking back to its mobile chip designs for inspiration. The result was the Core architecture, released in the year 2006, which shifted the focus from speed to efficiency. This was the birth of the multi-core era, where processors would no longer rely on one giant, overheating core to do all the work. Instead, they would split the labor among multiple, smaller, and more efficient brains working in perfect harmony. The Core 2 Duo and Core 2 Quad processors redefined what we expected from our machines, making multitasking a standard part of the human experience. Suddenly, you could play a high-end game while recording video and running background applications without the system choking. This era brought a sense of balance and stability back to the market, and Intel quickly regained its position as the undisputed leader. However, with leadership came a dangerous sense of complacency that would eventually lead to another period of boredom. For nearly a decade, Intel dominated the market so completely that they felt little pressure to truly innovate. Between the years 2011 and 2017, the world of CPUs entered a long and uninspired plateau. Each new generation of Intel processors offered only incremental improvements, often just 5 or 10% faster than the previous year. The standard for high-end gaming remained stuck at 4 cores, and prices remained stubbornly high because there was no one to challenge the status quo. Consumers felt trapped in a cycle of expensive upgrades that offered very little real-world benefit. It was a reminder that without the fire of competition, technology does not move forward, it simply sits still and collects profit. The silence was finally broken in the year 2017 with the arrival of a shockwave known as Ryzen AMD, which had spent years in the shadows and was near the brink of irrelevance. Returned with a completely new architecture called Zen, Ryzen didn't just offer a small improvement. It doubled the core counts available to average consumers at a fraction of the previous cost. It was a declaration of war that forced Intel to abandon its stagnant 4-core designs almost overnight. The market was suddenly flooded with power, and the pace of innovation accelerated to a level we hadn't seen since the late 90s. Today, we live in an era where processors are no longer just calculators, they're becoming thinking machines. Modern chips utilize hybrid architectures, combining high-performance cores with high-efficiency cores to manage complex workloads intelligently. We are seeing the integration of artificial intelligence directly onto the silicon, allowing our computers to anticipate our needs and assist us in real time. The future promises even more radical shifts, with stacked three-dimensional designs and chips that can rewrite their own logic to suit the task at hand. We have come a long way from the 1 MHz dream, but the spirit of competition remains the true engine of our progress. As we look back on this long journey from the Yano 6502 to the modern Ryzen and Core i9 monsters, a clear pattern emerges. Every major leap forward was preceded by a period of failure, and every great success was born from the pressure of a rival. The silicon humming inside your machine is not just a collection of transistors. It is a testament to the human desire to overcome limits. It tells a story of how we handle power, how we react to failure, and how we find our way back through humility. This history matters because it reflects our own evolution as a species that is constantly trying to do more with less. The lesson we can take from the history of the CPU is that competition is the only thing that keeps us from becoming stagnant. When one entity holds all the power, whether it is a company or an individual, the drive to improve begins to wither away. We must embrace the challenges and the rivals in our own lives. as they are the ones who force us to refine our architecture and find new strengths. Just as Intel had to abandon its ego to create the core architecture, we must sometimes let go of our old ways to make room for something better. True growth is never a straight line. It is a series of corrections, resets, and bold leaps into the unknown. I hope this exploration of our digital heritage has given you a new perspective on the tools you use every day. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the philosophy of hardware, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Which era of gaming or computing do you remember most fondly, and how did it shape your view of the future? I wish you all great health, a sharp mind, and the courage to keep innovating in your own life. Thank you for spending your valuable time with me, and I will see you in the next chapter of our story.